Today, we're diving into a case that really forces us to ask some big questions about speech, knowledge, and justice in our digital world. It all starts with one scholar, a single click online, and a verdict that kind of challenges the very idea of what a crime is.
Disseminated false statements, disrupted social order. I mean, listen to that language. This isn't just a casual comment. This is the official accusation from the state. These words are the legal foundation for a process that completely upended someone's life, painting this picture of a person deliberately trying to cause chaos.
And this right here is the heart of the puzzle. The so-called crime? Retweeting stuff on a social media platform that's blocked in the country. And the consequence? 1 year and 8 months in prison. 20 months. So how do you get from A to B? Well, figuring that out is what this explainer is all about.
Okay, so first, let's meet the person at the center of all this. His name is Dr. Chen Yuan. He's an independent academic, he's got a PhD, and his specialty is in complex systems. And that's actually pretty important here. It's basically the science of how small actions can lead to large-scale effects, or maybe more importantly in this case, how they can't.
So let's just look at the raw facts from the official record. Dr. Chen gets arrested in September 2022. The charge itself is, well, it's a famously flexible one: picking quarrels and provoking trouble. The alleged act? Retweeting. And the final sentence, after his appeal was shot down, was 1 year and 8 months. These are the undisputed facts, the skeleton of the whole story.
To really get our heads around this verdict, we first have to try and understand the prosecution's logic. I mean, how did the state manage to build a case that turned a few clicks on a screen into a criminal act that deserves serious prison time? Let's break down their argument.
And this right here is where things get really interesting. The prosecution actually took Dr. Chen's own credentials and turned them against him. His PhD wasn't seen as a mark of a curious academic mind, no? Instead, the court used it to establish intent. They basically argued that a guy with his education wasn't just, carelessly sharing stuff. He knew what he was doing, and he did it with malicious intent.
So, their case really rested on three main pillars. First, they labeled the content false information, essentially defining political criticism as a falsehood. Second, they argued he spread it knowingly and used his PhD as proof. And third, they claimed it had a real negative outcome, serious confusion and public order, even though they never actually presented any evidence of, real-world disturbances.
And that was that. The appeal was rejected, the first verdict was upheld, and the ruling was declared final. For the judicial system, the book was closed. But for Dr. Chen, the intellectual fight was really just getting started.
Okay, so now let's flip the coin. From inside his prison cell, Dr. Chen didn't just claim he was innocent, he actually wrote this incredibly detailed, systematic, and frankly brilliant refutation of the entire case against him.
And he did not mince words. He called the whole thing a complete fabrication, a miscarriage of justice built on a flimsy excuse. This wasn't just a denial, it was a counter-accusation. He was basically framing the legal process itself as the real crime here.
And this just shows how methodical he was. He took the prosecution's so-called evidence and he started classifying it, like a true academic. He argued that most of it, cartoons, emotional tweets, political opinions, can't even be legally judged as true or false to begin with. And for the tiny little bit that was left, the factual stuff, he argued the prosecution never actually proved any of it was false. He was literally dismantling their case piece by piece.
And then he used his own expertise as a shield. He brought in his knowledge of complex systems theory, arguing that his tiny social media account, we're talking fewer than 100 followers, simply did not have the network capacity to scientifically cause any kind of large-scale social disorder. He wasn't just saying he was harmless, he was arguing he was provably harmless.
So, what we have here are two totally opposite stories: the court's verdict and the scholar's defense. To even begin to understand how a court could reach its conclusion, some analysts say we have to look beyond the law and dig into the psychology, into the minds that were actually making these decisions.
So let's start with a really key idea here: the fundamental attribution error. It sounds a bit academic, but it's a mental shortcut that all of us use. When we see someone else do something, our first instinct is to assume it's because of who they are, their personality, their intentions, and we tend to ignore the situation they're in. Analysts suggest the court saw Dr. Chen's retweet not as an act of academic curiosity, but as proof of a malicious character.
This table does a great job of summarizing this psychological deep dive. Look at the personality column. His perfectly healthy academic traits, like being open to new ideas, were basically twisted and reframed as criminal. Cognitively, his process of questioning things was misinterpreted as malice. While you could argue the court was suffering from its own biases, just looking for info that confirmed what it already believed. And from a social view, you see group dynamics, where maybe obeying authority just steamrolled over any critical thought.
So the really critical takeaway from this analysis is that this verdict was so much more than a simple legal ruling. It was effectively a psychological recoding. The very qualities that make someone a good scholar, curiosity, skepticism, the desire to explore different ideas, were systematically taken apart and redefined as the qualities of a criminal.
All right, finally, let's pull the camera all the way back for the widest possible view. Beyond the individual, beyond the psychology, how does this whole case hold up when you put it under the microscope of both international and even domestic law?
Well, when you place it next to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, legal analysts point to some pretty clear conflicts. Article 19 protects freedom of expression. Criminalizing a retweet seems to challenge that. Article 10 guarantees a fair and public hearing. That didn't happen here. And Article 11, the bedrock idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, was arguably flipped on its head when his education was used to presume his guilt.
And what's also really interesting is that analysts point to conflicts with China's own constitution. Article 35 guarantees freedom of speech. Article 41 gives citizens the right to criticize the state. And Article 33 says the state must respect and protect human rights. The argument here is that the verdict seems to be in direct tension with the foundational promises of the country's very own highest law.
And this really gets to the heart of the legal debate. That charge, picking quarrels and provoking trouble, is often described by legal experts as a pocket crime. Why? Because its definition is so incredibly broad and vague that you can stretch it to fit almost any situation. And that makes it, in their view, a very convenient tool to prosecute speech that the authorities just don't happen to like.
All of this leaves us with one final big question that just kind of hangs in the air. The case of Dr. Chen Jinyuan is about law, sure, but it's also about psychology, about cognitive bias, and about the very definition of knowledge. When a judicial system makes a judgment, it's not some abstract machine at work. It's a collection of human minds. And that forces us to ask, when a system judges a person, who has the tools, the right, and the courage to judge the mind of the system itself?